CNN's Brian Stelter had his last episode of Reliable Sources this Sunday. The show was canceled by CNN, possibly as part of major shakeups that might be coming to the network, given its new leadership, new management structure. Stelter had a last show featuring Carl Bernstein was one of the guests who talked about the need for media channels to be more frank about referring to Donald Trump as a criminal. Let's watch.
Line in the book, it's about what I learned as a 16, 17, 18-year-old going to work in journalism, is the line that I was taught by great reporters covering civil rights. And that is that the truth is not neutral. The truth is not neutral. That doesn't mean that we have to be fair in all we cover. We have to give acknowledgement to two sides. We have to be judicious, but not judicial. I know there's been a lot of angst about, for instance, calling Donald Trump, not on this network, but all over, a criminal. Well, you know, we called Nixon a criminal president in reporting on Watergate. In fact, he never was convicted of a crime, but he was a criminal president. Donald Trump is a serial liar, as I once called him on the air, and I said to myself, I hope that doesn't sound pejorative, because that's, and I reported, what most Republicans in the Senate of the United States regard him as. So I think we've got to do a better job explaining to our readers and our viewers what we do and how we do it, and at the same time, the bottom line has got to be the best obtainable version of the truth, and in fact, the truth is not neutral. Ask yourself this question. Is a lynching neutral? I've covered those kinds of stories. It's not neutral.
It's not neutral. I didn't know if the former president's name was going to come up so early in the hour, but it's appropriate.
Didn't know if the former president's name would come up. Batya, what did you make of that interview? I thought it was kind of indicative of an approach that is not working so well for that channel, but what do you think?
I think it is blasphemy to use lynching in that context. I'm sorry, I'm religious, and it is blasphemous to minimize the memory and the history in such a way that you're comparing lynching to what? To what are Donald Trump's crimes that Carl Bernstein believes lying? Lying is now supposed to be a crime, right? He says we should call Trump a criminal. And then what is his example of his crimes? Oh, he's a serial liar. So now the leftist view is lying should be a crime, and that's comparable to lynching. It is so disgusting. And it is so indicative of the problem with the leftist liberal mainstream media, which is they are high on their virtue, high on the idea that they are the ones who should be giving the American people information, that's neutral, right? Or that's objective, when all they're doing is pushing a politicized party line, and not just any politicized party line, but one that has immiserated the working class of all races, of all parties. That is what Trump represented, and they will not contend with that because it threatens their position in the elites, right? It threatens their position as the purveyors of quote-unquote truth. I'm sorry, truth does not have a liberal bias. In fact, the opposite might be the case. That's what the American people are increasingly saying today. So that clip, that Bernstein quote, is just so deplorable and really embodies everything that's wrong with the liberal mainstream media today.
I think it's fine to colloquially call Trump a criminal and Nixon a criminal, and Joe Biden and Obama and Bush and Clinton and probably all the rest of them have done things that colloquially, criminally are bad. In addition to some of them, committing actual obvious crimes. It's the selective approach that bothers people, that has become part and parcel of that channel's specific brand, I think, and that there's not enough people, tuning who want, especially as Trump exits, well, maybe is not exiting, but fades from the spotlight, which is not what they want. They want him in the spotlight because they need him there. They need him there. So much of the mainstream media does, because they've built an audience that really only cares about, that is following Trump developments with the expectation that it ends with him behind bars, or vanquish the kind of liberal resistance narrative, which is not happening, and they're going to be let down over and over again about it.
Totally.
But it's the whole idea, because yes, it is true. I mean, it's sort of obviously true, right? That yes, you don't need to present all. There's always two sides that need to be aired out. Yeah, right. Yes, we don't give equal time to like the flat earthers or something. There are content decisions made. There are judgment calls made by journalists all the time. What good journalists do is recognize when there is some legitimate criticism of a mainstream idea that warrants being paid attention to or reported on, or having an eloquent, well-educated representative of that view to give them some time to discuss it. That approach is beneficial, because sometimes the mainstream narrative is wrong. That's been true of foreign policy. That's been true of COVID. It's been true of all sorts of things. So if you're just myopically in this, no, there's just the truth. Well, of course there's just the truth, but we don't all know what that is. And we all get things wrong. We all have biases, even if we try really hard to work against them. So it's good practice for a journalist to curate the habit, the hobby of saying, well, what would someone who disagrees with me think? What would be the best version of their argument? Is it worth giving some attention to that, letting people hear from it? And will it be that the truth is maybe somewhere in between, or a little bit more their direction than I thought first, or maybe totally in their direction, as in the case with, like the Iraq War, some COVID mitigation efforts, other things. We can come up with tons more if we sat here. So much of the Russia collusion thinking falling, a very popular mainstream media conspiracy that almost entirely fell apart. So we could do that all day, but it's the right habit of mind for journalists to think these things through a little bit more. And there was Carl Bernstein, unfortunately, giving no indication that he subscribes to what I would call the more kind of responsible or nuanced view of how we arrive at what the truth is, because we don't agree. So we have to look for it a little bit.
100%. And the reason they do that is because they don't want to anger their audience. And further on in that interview, Brian Stelter says to Carl Bernstein, and we report the truth even when it's uncomfortable, right? Even when it's uncomfortable. And Bernstein goes, yes, even when it's uncomfortable. And it's such a farce, because these people never, ever say anything that would upset their very elite progressive audience. So they are under this misconception that they are these brave fighters for taking on Trump, when the truth is they never, ever say anything that they think that their audience is going to not like or disagree with. And so, they take on this paper tiger in the form of Trump, right? And you're right, they're addicted to it. Their biggest fear is that Ron DeSantis is they're going to have to actually, critique actual policy. And it's just so disappointing. And that clip is, again, I just say so perfect, because, he comes out there and says, we have to tell the truth. Well, what is the truth? The truth is that because Trump is a liar, he's a criminal who's as bad as people who lynched people, right? Like, you think that's an objective truth? Of course it's not an objective truth. That's not any kind of truth, right? That's just Democratic propaganda, the Democratic Party line. And, that's what they consider. That this is why CNN is struggling, is because unlike MSNBC that said, look, we're, they didn't say this, but, essentially have just accepted their role as being spokespeople for the Democratic Party. CNN is still under the impression that they're doing this kind of brave journalism while essentially doing the same thing, just parroting those talking points.
Well, although we've been very critical of that show and some of its guests, I do have to thank Brian Stelter did have me on the show a couple times and did have you on. Yes. So unlike a lot of people on the mainstream media who will never deviate from the kind of bringing on resistance type guests, or former FBI so many former G-men have found a home on these mainstream networks. I was grateful to be on and share my perspective, and I know you had a really great, really fiery clip that I think it was beneficial for that audience to see. So I'm to the extent that there's going to possibly be even less of that going on in mainstream media. I think the loss of the show is in that sense a shame. So there's that.
Yeah, although Fox News is still hosting, they'll have Democrats on all the time. So that is happening somewhere.
And they have Democrats watching.
Too true.
All right, we'll be back with more Rising in just a minute.